In today's video, we're going to talk about the notorious Afghan squads backed by US militia and their joint undertakings. So without further delay, let's get started. Who are the controversial Afghan hunter teams? The shadowy CIA-backed militias nominally fall under the purview of the National Directorate of Security, or NDS, Afghanistan Intelligence Service. They consist of 01, which operates mainly in central Afghan provinces, including Wardak and Logar, 02 with a base in Jalalabad and with jurisdiction in the eastern part of Afghanistan, 03, known as Kandahar Strike Force, operates in the south, and 04 launches raids in Kunar and adjacent provinces in the northeast. Two other units positioned in the southeast are commonly referred to as Coast Protection Force and Shaheen Forces. The latter emerged in the eastern Afghan province of Paktika in 2019 and are thought to work under similar authority. Omega is a codename no longer used and was first used in Afghanistan. Omega is a joint program between the CIA and Joint Special Operations Command that irresistibly reminds us of the MAC-V-SOG Military Assistance Command Studies and Observation Group collaboration during the Vietnam War. It includes elements of the 75th Ranger Regiment, Dev Group, and Delta Force. It uses special operations soldiers to enroll in demanding and difficult missions, while the CIA provides targeting intelligence. According to many, Afghan hunter teams belong to an elite CIA paramilitary, also known as Unit 01, and they were accompanied by US Special Operations Forces and Air Power to finish some dirty tasks, such as unleashing a campaign of terror against civilians. From the beginning of this lethal collaboration, in December of 2018, as many as 51 civilians lost their lives, including boys as young as 8. The joint CIA JSOC hunter teams have performed 10 raids so far, thanks to the testimonies of 20 survivors, witnesses, victims' relatives, local officials, analysts, community representatives, and others. We now have the full horrific story of the mayhem these teams perpetrated. CIA's involvement in Afghanistan. An NDS counterterrorism officer from Wardak, who accompanied 01's missions until 2018, stated he's not sure if these units are Special Forces, Task Force, or CIA itself. Since the CIA's founding in 1947, it's been involved in many worldwide operations, and is known to train, arm, and fund militia networks globally. The CIA holds a Title 50 authority, which allows for covert operations, while the Army holds a Title 10 authority. Mixing the two authorities by using a method called sheep-dipping active duty military personnel allows for the best of both worlds. It exploits a legal loophole and bypasses the intent of the law, so the military, CIA, and politicians decide to go with it. The squad is not only active in Afghanistan, but in Pakistan, Yemen, and other countries as well. Firstly, the CIA supported anti-communist movements in Greece, Cuba, Laos, Vietnam, and Central America, as well as the Afghan Mujahideen in the 1980s. Since the September 11 attacks, the CIA has immensely changed its methods and started providing training and arms to its allies from Syria to Somalia, with dubious outcomes. However, the CIA's intervention differs from every other intervention because it looks like the CIA considers Afghanistan's war as its own war. Because of that, the US allocated almost 5% of its intelligence budget to perform a covert operation in Afghanistan in 2013. The CIA didn't only establish strike force units, but also selected their targets, planned their missions, and borrowed special operations forces from the Pentagon to coordinate air support. Why did the CIA and Afghan squads decide to team up? A program like Omega represents the biggest fear to American citizens because they think their special operations soldiers serve as CIA assassins. But in reality, Omega missions don't differ vastly from any special operations mission because they both include capture and assassination of targets, conducting vehicle interdictions, as well as gathering intelligence and many other tasks. Even though the CIA and JSOC would most likely be able to finish their tasks independently of one another, that scenario would make it much more difficult for both teams. It means that these two organizations would be competing for the same mission. It's much more profitable and easier for them to work together. Different approaches to the Afghanistan war by various US leaders. During the Obama presidency, the CIA didn't have an aggressive approach in Afghanistan at first. Thanks to Vice President Joe Biden's strong advocacy, Barack Obama changed his approach and decided to double down on drones, intelligence operatives, and special forces. On the other hand, ex-President Donald Trump started implementing the controversial practice of normalizing war crimes by pardoning soldiers who were previously convicted of assassinating people, including the ones who assassinated Afghans. Even though he negated serious war crimes, he still managed to establish the policy of peace, at least to some extent, by withdrawing the military from Afghanistan. Unfortunately, that wasn't what was really happening behind the scenes. Pompeo, who was a director of the CIA at the time, stated that the CIA must be more aggressive, vicious, unforgiving, and relentless. 2 years after that speech, the CIA allegedly eliminated 1,000 Talibans in just 10 days, under the excuse that the CIA is only assassinating terrorists. That was a very vivid illustration of the contrast between the rhetoric of peace and the escalating and worrisome war violence. Usual targets of Unit 01. Most of the time, Unit 01 attacked madrasas and mosques, but frequently they also targeted residences occupied by families. They assassinated as many as 33 religious students, and some Wardak residents claimed that Taliban fighters visit madrasas to recruit extremely vulnerable students who were poor or abandoned into jihad. Another important indicator is that 01 frequently assassinated young boys, not only because they wanted to destroy their current existing enemies, but their future as well. They also targeted health clinics quite often. The CIA did not want to answer any questions related to these raids. Neither did other national security officials, NDA or American-led military mission participants in Afghanistan. The Wardak situation. When it comes to Wardak, the situation is very sensitive and complex. First of all, when US forces were based in Wardak, they would only hunt Taliban. They didn't seem to care about civilian casualties, but seemed to be deliberately targeting them as well. According to some sources, 01 eliminates civilians mostly in Taliban-controlled areas due to their wrong assumption that anyone who lives in these areas must be the enemy. Afghan fighters admit they are not the decision-makers, but only the implementers. They claim they do whatever foreigners say and that they don't have a right to object or refuse to execute the orders. Currently, Wardak is considered to be the territory under the Taliban's jurisdiction, because the government presence there is very limited. 3 governors of these 3 districts live in exile in Kabul, traveling to the place rarely and always in heavily armed convoys or helicopters. During the elections, even the election officials needed to be transported by helicopter. During one presidential election, only 73 votes were registered across all of Wardak Nurk district, reportedly all of them being ANSF, Afghan National Security Forces. Besides election officials, voters and sources who wanted to stay anonymous for security reasons receive explicit daily threats, and that's the reason for this embarrassingly low number of votes. One veteran NDS officer thinks that Wardak is done because it now belongs to the Taliban except for Maidan Shah, the only place that remains out of Taliban reach. There are some very mixed feelings when it comes to the Taliban in Wardak. Firstly, the Taliban are not in good relations with their government because the government can't meet their needs and they simply don't trust them. Secondly, they have certain animosity towards the security forces, meaning nobody wants the Taliban government there. But, on the other hand, they also have sympathy for each other, mostly thanks to religion and local traditions. They're against the government, but they wouldn't dare to assassinate another Taliban, because if they assassinate a Taliban, it means they assassinated a Wardaki, which is unacceptable. Is there a need to change the approach? According to Taliban spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid, the 01 raids have the opposite effect. because they just motivate Mujahideen fighters to fight harder. He states that 0-1 attacks have no adverse effects on their morale, but in fact boosts it. The Taliban are known to exaggerate facts and figures for propaganda purposes, but the correlation between misconduct by foreign forces and Taliban recruitment is well documented. In addition, an Afghan national security advisor, Mohib, also shares a similar opinion. He added that he disagrees with the mechanisms they use to fight terrorism, and they need to change the approach if they want to achieve their goals. He thinks it's important to find out why people are fighting, and therefore implement a tactic to put a stop to it rather than using violence, because it only triggers the escalation of more violence. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and comment on this video. Also, don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you like what we're doing and want us to continue with more cool content. Until the next time.